Welcome back to the First Team. I'm Joe DeLeone. With me is my co-host, good friend, Ryan Roberts, NFL draft analyst for A to Z Sports. It feels so nice to say that, actually leading you in with a draft analyst moniker. And today we're going to be doing another draft for the best picks in a particular round. We've already done busts. We've done 7th rounders. Today we're doing 6th rounders. I made sure to secure the first overall pick so I don't miss out on getting the top guy. So you texted me last night. I think there's 2 guys. You tried to claim like there was only one surefire answer. I think there's 2 guys that could go for this first overall selection. I won't say who just yet, but you were trying to get in my head, and I think I know who I'm picking.
Well, I think there's 2 positions that there is a stupid drop off from 1 to 2. Okay, like stupid drop off to 1 to 2. But I think that there's one that is even more like it is a peak versus a valley, in my opinion, for 1 to 2. So yes, I think there is a right answer, Joe. I do think there's a right answer. I don't necessarily think the second option is wrong. I just think it's less right than the first one I'm thinking of.
Well, I'll start us off then. My first pick that I'm going to go with, Ryan, and I can't miss out on the fact because I was deliberating going with a particular offensive lineman, but I have to take Antonio Brown, albeit he is a problematic individual. 12,000 receiving yards, 928 receptions, 83 touchdowns, was the 2010 195th overall pick out of Central Michigan. His impact, and also I would even argue the way that he has reshaped value of his body type at receiver, I think is even more notable. In 2010, for that streak of time where he was one of the best receivers in the league, back when he was picked where he was, those smaller, compact, yards after catch type of receivers weren't always, I think, as highly valued as they are right at this moment. Right. So he is really a key cog in changing the game. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, I mean, he was unguardable. There was no keeping up with, there was no way to scheme around Antonio Brown. So that is a slam dunk one, because I think if I miss out on my offensive line play, I'm not going to be too broken up.
Yeah, that was the pick, Joe. That was the pick, because there is a significant drop off.
Who do you think the second guy that I was thinking of was?
Well, I don't know.
No. All right. Don't spoil.
Well, no. If you're talking about offensive line, you're probably talking about Jason Kelce, right? Like that was kind of.
Yeah, I was talking about Jason Kelce.
But you know what, Joe? I actually wasn't thinking offensive line with the first pick, just because I do think that there are some really, really good options at offensive line other than Jason Kelce. I mean, I'm not talking about a Hall of Famer yet, but talking about, a couple of really, really good NFL offensive linemen. So here's the spot that I'm going to go, though, Joe, because we talked before the show. Edge is bad class, man. It is not a good 6th round class, but there is
it's terrible.
There is one player that, although his career did not last incredibly long, for a 2 to 3 year span, was one of the best edge rushers in the NFL, and that is 2010 6th round pick Greg Hardy out of Ole Miss.
Okay, that's where I thought you were going in this,
Joe.
I didn't put him on there because I saw his name. I was like, I don't feel like bringing him up.
Well, it's funny.
I don't feel like bringing him up.
Dude, it's super funny.
I was hoping that someone better would show up, and I was just like, let's see what happens. And I was completely
the second name I had on my list, I don't know if this is where you're going to go later, but like Jacob Martin, Carl Brooks, it's like, man, it's hideous.
I have someone a little bit better.
It is not a good list, man. And again, it's funny enough as we go from bad character to more bad character on back-to-back picks, but I mean, there was no doubting, though, for like a 2-year span, Greg Hardy was a dog, bro. Like, he was a Pro Bowler, 11 sacks, 15 sacks, 13 tackles for loss, 17 tackles for loss. He was a really good player for Carolina before his attitude and off the field stuff kind of got in the way and ended up in Dallas there. But I'm going to go Greg Hardy, because I just think the drop off from edge 1 to edge 2 is like a chasm, dude. It is not a good class at all. So that's number 1.
Yeah, I guess if you want an edge rusher, or not an edge rusher, if you want a player with character issues, go in the 6th round, because it is an all-pro team of guys that have some serious issues, because the first 2 players we selected were just serious dickheads.
Well, it's funny that you mention it that way, and I know you're obviously joking about it, but you're not actually wrong. I mean, there's a reason that some guys do drop to later in drafts. Like that is actually a topic of conversation, maybe for another time.
Well, we didn't have this problem with the seventh rounders.
Though. Yeah, well, seventh rounders usually a gamble though, but like we see guys drop to the set. I mean, because we're talking about. I mean, you just mentioned one of the best receivers of our generation in Antonio Brown. Like again, forget the off the field stuff. Dude was phenomenal. Like there's no doubt about that for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I just mentioned a guy that could have been one of the best pass rushers of our generation if he wasn't such a jerk, right? Like he could have been that type of dude.
Jerk might even be putting.
If he wasn't a jackass, like whatever word you want to use, like an awful human being, right? If he wasn't, he probably would have ended up being an all-pro almost every single year. I mean, he was that type of player. So unfortunate, but that is just kind of where we are with that selection. So.
Side stupid note, he probably could have been a really good tight end too. Do you remember back when Ole Miss used
when he was around 85,
put him in goal line package?
I think he was around 85 at that point. Yeah, because he was actually a tight end first, and then he transitioned to defensive end. I remember that one at Ole Miss. So very interesting note. Second pick.
All right, who you got next?
Pick. I am debating between going Jason Kelce, going the offensive lineman route, or there is another position that I do think there's a little bit of a steep drop off from number 1 to number 2, and that's kind of like my internal debate right now. Yeah. Let's go that instead. No. I can't pass up Jason Kelce. I'm sorry. I'm switching up on you. Okay. Right. I'm going back and forth. Right. There's some other great options that you have to pick from, Joe. Michael Onwenu, Trey Smith, Ryan Jensen. Like there's a lot of good players, but I could argue that I might get the only Hall of Famer on this list because Antonio Brown's probably going to be boycotted for the rest of his life. So I'm going to go with Jason Kelce here.
Yeah, you took one of the guys that I was paying close attention to, and this draft actually isn't horrible direction-wise where to go now because I don't think I'm in tough positioning because there's a lot of position groups that have multiple guys that are draftable. I'm going to start off.
I do think there's still one position though where there is a little bit of a steep drop, and I'm hoping you don't pick him here.
This is the one that I think you're referring to. I'm going to go to running back here. Latavius Murray, 2013, pick 181 from UCF. Had one of the craziest pro days ever, if anyone remembers this. Didn't get the combine invite. Had like a 4.3 40. And I remember I used to mess with, at practice, this was when I was in high school. I used to mess with my coaches. I used to mess with my teammates because I was telling everybody and anyone, this guy is going to be ridiculously good in fantasy football for the Raiders because he's an unreal
Central
athlete.
Florida, baby.
And everybody used to clown on me. Central Florida. And he didn't necessarily have like a crazy year. He did have a couple stretches where he was. He had a good year. He had a stretch where he was a really fun fantasy back for a couple of different seasons, and he had some health issues. Latavius Murray, when we did our running back show, kind of fits what I brought up with, I think it was Manungai, where I said, just feels like a guy who's just going to stick around for so long, and 11 years into his career, you're going to look at him and go, how did this guy have this many rushing yards? And that's exactly Latavius Murray. He's played 151 games for 6,552 yards and 59 touchdowns. Just a longevity play for somebody who was banged up early on in his career. So I can't not go with Latavius Murray.
No, Latavius was the easy answer. There's a couple good running backs behind him, but there's nobody that has almost 7,000 yards and 60-something touchdowns, right? Yeah. Like he is the most accomplished running back by a landslide on this one. And Joe, you mentioned 4-3.
Boston Scott is another option.
Boston Scott stinks, dude. Boston Scott stinks. Sorry, stop.
Giant killer.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the only team he ever plays well against. It's actually pretty wild statistics. I mean, I think it was like in a 3-year span, he had 7 touchdowns and 6 of them were against the Giants or something like that. Like it was a really obnoxious stat. Yeah. But one thing I wanted to mention was you mentioned the 4.37 or whatever Latavius ran. Put it in context, Joe. He ran that at 6'2 plus and 227 pounds or something like that. Like it was a wild pro day.
All right, next direction here. This is tough.
You're gonna hate my next direction, by the way. You're gonna hate my next direction, but I am gonna cheat so bad, and we're gonna go.
I'm not gonna go at quarterback here because I think there's 2 options that are really even, so I'm not upset with any way that we go. Tight end, there's 3 recoverable options where they all had pretty similar. Oh man, I do not know where I want to. I'm going to go with defensive tackle because I don't think that there's a lot of really good rotational defensive tackles, but there weren't a number that popped off for me. I might have missed somebody. Please tell me if I did. I'm going to go with Christian Covington, who was in 2015 the 216th pick out of Rice. He had 9.5 career sacks, 102 career games that he played in, but a really good defensive lineman. He was one of those guys that was kind of just a block eater, has been really good, and I believe he's still. Why am I tripping up? Is he still in the league?
I think he's a rotational player for someone. Yeah, I think he's still a rotational player.
Yeah, but just a quality. Oh no, he's in Canada right now. Just a quality guy. Who am I missing here? I feel like the defensive line group is just a bunch of.
I mean, so that's your pick, right? So I can say who I'm probably going to take later. Is that possible? Like, I'm probably going to go Sebastian Joseph Day, that plays with the Chargers now. That was the Rams. Like, he's a good player, but like Joe, he's not substantially better than Kurt. Like, they're in a bucket, right?
No.
Like, they're rotational players.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Ready for my back-to-back? I'm cheating here, and I'm going to cut the legs out from under you. Are you ready for this one? Are you ready?
Swear to God.
Watch this. Ready?
I swear to God.
First pick. You did this before last week, so don't yell at me about this one, okay? You picked a player that was listed at a position when they were drafted and eventually transitioned to another, okay? First one. I am going to take 2015 6-rounder out of Georgia Tech, Darren Waller, as a wide receiver.
Oh, but this is fine.
Wide receiver. I'm taking him as a wide receiver.
Oh, what?
He was drafted as a wide receiver. Go look it up. He was drafted as.
He didn't.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. He literally did play wide receiver.
I know that he was with the Ravens.
I'm taking him. He was a wide receiver in the NFL. He was drafted as a wide receiver.
I don't think that's the same as the Shelby Harris thing.
Yes,
I really don't.
Yes, it is. He was drafted as a defensive end. And he actually, literally, I think Waller played more wide receiver than Shelby Harris played defensive end in his career. Yes, 100% this counts. 1,000,000% this counts. It counts.
I'll
go look up the combine.
Who else would you have gone? Who else could you have gone?
Reference.
Who else could?
Yeah.
I know. I remember Darren Waller. When he came out, who else would you have gone with? Like, who were your other options to defend the
Quincy
point?
Enunwa, like Braxton Berrios. Like, I don't know, dude. It was a bad list. That's the point. Russell Gage. Like, it's a bad list.
I don't know why you're wasting a duplicate position already, though.
You know why I am?
Okay, go ahead.
The back-to-back here. I'm taking Charles Clay as my tight end. 2011.
Damn it.
6th-round pick out of Tulsa. If you remember him at Tulsa, he played with Paul Smith, I think, was the quarterback. Yeah. He was kind of like a H slots, played all over the place, eventually settled into being a very, very productive tight end for the Buffalo Bills during the course of his career. Miami Dolphins early on in his career. I just got who I think are the two best, quote-unquote, tight ends in the draft because I maneuvered here, Joe. I maneuvered it and made it happen, sir. Made it happen.
You're a cuck. I hate you. All right, I'm coming back around here. You were hyping up the safety group. I don't totally know which direction you're going to go in. I think there's a couple of guys that played both safety and corner, so I'm curious to see where you go there. I do want to go, man. I'm going to go corner first. I'm going to go with Justin Bethel from 2012, pick 177. 193 career games. Like, that's a lot of football games.
Pro Bowl special teamer.
Yeah. He might have, outside of Jason Kelce, who had 193 career games, I think he has the most career games that he's played in out of any of these guys that we're talking about today. So just from a longevity standpoint, he makes a lot of sense. 235 career tackles, 5 interceptions, just a really quality, consistent player. I'm going to come back around to linebacker. I think there's 2 players that we could totally go with here.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, that was not going to be the corner I was going to pick, by the way. Was not, but we'll talk about that later.
Okay. I'm going to go with a player who's still playing and I think has some runway to continue to improve. I'm going to go with Foyesade Oluwakan, who was drafted as a safety, but I'm not a hack, so I'm not going to do that.
He's actually drafted as a linebacker. You're wrong. He was drafted as a linebacker. You're wrong.
Pro Football Reference has him as a safety. I had to double check. All right. He is a safety or a linebacker right now, and he's a damn good linebacker. 2018, 200 overall pick out of Yale. 511 career tackles in this short span of time. He has been one of the better improving linebackers over this short span over the past couple of years. I think Oluokun is somebody who we could end up be talking about one of the greater 6th round picks if he continues to produce, I think, the way that he's done.
Most tackles in the NFL the last 3 years, Oluokun. I'm just very glad that you picked him because I do have another good linebacker option on the board, and I did not want to pronounce his name.
I know who it is. I'll let you.
Yeah. Well,
you didn't know how to pronounce Oluokun? I think I'm mispronouncing his first name, but I believe it's Oluokun.
I saw his name, and I was just very defeated before I even tried to pronounce it. I'm like, I don't want to do it. I am going to go to safety here, Joe. I'm going to go to safety here. I do think there's some good options on the board, but I'm going to go with Quandre Diggs out of Texas is going to be my pick at safety.
I had him written down as a corner because he was drafted as a corner, so I wasn't totally sure. This is a good pick, though. It's a great pick.
He played a lot of corner and nickel at Texas, but he's now settled in. I mean, he's been a Pro Bowl safety for several years now. So 2015 out of Texas, a little bit of an undersized guy, but I mean, he's been used all over the place in the NFL. And like I said, he's settled into a Pro Bowl level safety I mean, he's been a good player on multiple teams at this point, but the Lions obviously has been the team that he's been the best on. So. All right, Quandre Diggs, 2015. Next? Is there any other position that hasn't been taken? I'm trying to look.
Quarterback.
We
haven't taken a quarterback yet. There's 2 career backups who have filled in spots. There's going to be no Ben DiNucci happening today. That's not going to happen.
Thank God that there's no Ben DiNucci happening. So, I mean, I guess I have to go quarterback, though, because that's the only position that hasn't been taken. Otherwise, we're just kind of going through our list. I'll go with Tyrod Taylor, 2011 out of Virginia Tech. I'll go with Tyrod.
Okay. I kind of want to
Tyrod. Look, you mentioned the other option who's fine, who's actually a really good bridge, who has been a guy that has started a bunch of games in the NFL at this point. I'm going to go with Tyrod out of Virginia Tech, though, just because he's had a little bit more longevity, actually a lot more longevity as a starter. He was a good player for the Buffalo Bills for a couple of years. He actually took the Buffalo Bills to the playoffs for the first time in a long time. He's thrown for 65 touchdowns in his career, over 12,000 yards. He has, I believe, been to a Pro Bowl, but he's run for 19 more touchdowns. Yes. He has been to 1 Pro Bowl, and he's a Super Bowl champion, Joe, because he was a backup for the who was he a backup for that won the Super Bowl? Baltimore Ravens. He was a backup for the Baltimore Ravens and won a Super Bowl. So there you go.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts. I forget who it was, but somebody put on Twitter that year where he was a Pro Bowler. I think he had 3,000 passing yards. He had 20 touchdowns in 2015.
Yep.
And he rushed for rushing yards.
I think he had a decent amount of rushing yards.
I think he only had, someone threw up there. He had like a similar
4 touchdowns that you're rushing. Yep.
It wasn't Lamar, but somebody put up and compared their stats.
Oh no.
The year that he went to the Pro Bowl and he immediately got like canned not long after. I forget who it was. It's going to bug crap into me. I don't want to misspeak. But I'm going to just come back around and take my quarterback. I would maybe argue there's a path for Gardner Minshew being the starter this season for the Raiders to exceed the on-field production. And I think he's already kind of proven himself enough. He just needs to be slightly below average and not go any lower for him to keep getting jobs. I think eventually he's going to outperform Tyrod Taylor because right now he's got 9,937 career passing yards. He was the 178th overall pick out of Wazoo in 2019. There's a runway for him to outperform Tyrod. Tyrod, though, is just the epitome, though, and he had a little bit more of a difficult path, I think, to sticking because it was a couple of years before he really started to get opportunities and then that opportunity to start. Tremendous job of outperforming his expectations. But Gardner Minshew has been a consistent plug-and-play guy, and I think a lot of teams just like the Colts, are going to look at him and say, hey, we need a backup quarterback who could maybe start for this rookie. Right. Let's go with Gardner Minshew. He is Ryan Fitzpatrick. He is the epitome of what Ryan Fitzpatrick was, and I think he's just eventually evolving into that.
Yeah, he's been one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL in this era, though, right? I mean, like even last year, Joe, the Giants' offense was putrid, but when Tyrod came in, it was better. Like he's just a good backup quarterback, and he's been a solid.
Yeah, but we went with Italian Jeremy Lin,
who's awful, terrible player, man. But remember they tried to make him a thing that the Tommy, what was it, Tommy? What do they call him?
Cutlets.
Tommy Cutlets. That's it. Yeah, that was weird.
Look, it was fun for like 10 minutes. But the minute that we lost out on Drake May, I will never forgive Tommy DeVito. I hope he understands.
Though. It's not his fault. It's your team's fault. It's your organization's fault.
It is his fault because they clearly deliberately. I wish there were the Giants were the in-season team because I would have loved to sit in on the meeting room where they were like, let's put the veto in. We don't expect to win. It might actually help us lose. And then he goes out there and wins a bunch of games that he didn't need to win. Tight end for me, though, just to come back with my back-to-back, I'm going to go with Ryan Griffin out of UConn, 2013, pick 201. Dude, 134 career games, 2,184 yards. Who else would I have gone with here? This is a great pick.
Because I cut your legs out, sir. I cut your legs out. You had no other option.
He's only got 1,000 less yards than Charles Clay.
He's way better than Ryan Griffin. Do not do this to me, Joe. Do not do it.
He was more consistent for a longer period of time. I don't know if that's as much of a slam dunk as you think it is.
I'll ask people on Twitter who was a better player.
Ryan Griffin is like the best tight end 2 in the last 10 years that we've seen just in terms of longevity.
I have a tight end 1 on my list, so I prefer those. I prefer those a little bit more. I'm sorry. I prefer them.
Ben DiNucci all over again. All right, you're back to back.
I am going to go with corner 2011 Byron Maxwell. Byron Maxwell out of Clemson. He ended up being a starting corner for a long time in the NFL. 11 interceptions, 58 pass breakups, over 200 tackles. He was, because he wasn't good in Philly, but during his Seattle days with the Legion of Boom, he was a very underrated piece and was actually a very good football player for the Legion of Boom as a second corner to Richard Sherman. So give me Byron Maxwell as my corner with Quandre Diggs in the back end.
Okay.
And then I'm going to go with linebacker here. Okay. Linebacker. I'm going to go with who was actually one of my favorite players. I used to have a crush on this dude when he was at the University of Kentucky. I'm going to go with Danny Trevathan in the 2012 draft. Over 700.
That was my backup linebacker.
Over 700 career tackles, man. Silent to silent. He kind of was one of the early dudes in the 2010s of this is what more of a modern day will linebacker looks like. Small.
Compact, he can fly.
Yeah, he can move. He was a great coverage linebacker. Danny Trevathan.
He was one of those guys where when you were talking about will backers, and this was when I was in high school when he was at his peak, but whenever you were trying to have a conversation with somebody about like what a will backer epitomizes, you'd go, Danny Trevathan is exactly what you're looking for. Cleanup guy, really quick, downhill, understands how to read and navigate blocks. And then you talked about he's pretty strong in coverage. He had some crazy stretches for the production that he had, especially for the Broncos. I'm going to come back around here. I'm going to take my offensive lineman. Okay. I'm just going to go with Ryan Jensen, 100 career games, 2013, pick 203. Believe he was on the Super Bowl team with the Bucs.
He was starting center for them. Starting center. Yep.
Won a Super Bowl. So we're going to go with Ryan Jensen.
Did you have any quarrel in your mind with taking Trey Smith, who's like the young gun, one of the best guards in the NFL, or Michael Onwenu, just got paid like almost $20 million a year? I mean,
Onwenu, I deliberated on. And also with Trey Smith, I deliberated on. I just feel like it's too recent with all those better options. I mean, again, the guy won a Super Bowl, and he wasn't one of the best centers in the league for a stretch, but he was one of the better ones. Like you could argue he was top 10. Just I think consistency is important for talking about these lists, unless we have to, and we pick a guy who has a peak like a Greg Hardy. It's important to look at the Latavius Murray's of the group to say, hey, this guy just stuck around and did the right things. and that helped him really boost his long-term stats. Think about how many guys we talk about in Hall of Fame conversations that played in the 80s that we didn't even really get to watch, that we just say, look at his stats, look how good he was. But those who watched him play aren't maybe going to hype him up as much because, they weren't as crazy good on Sundays. I'm going to come in with my edge rusher. Man, I absolutely hate this one. I texted you. I said, I can't find an edge rusher. I said, I need a couple more minutes because I can't find a goddamn edge rusher. I'm going to go with a guy who, for a brief period of time with the Lions, was a productive player and had a really good stretch of a couple of games, and now is a rotational rusher.
Talk yourself into it, man. Go ahead.
I'm taking James Houston.
One good year as a rookie.
Okay. Wait, 1 second. Pick 217 in 2022 out of Jackson State. Yep. He has 8 career sacks, which isn't great.
In 1 year, though. In 1 year.
In comparison to all of the other guys that I looked at. I kept pulling up. Pro Football Reference is really good at, if you read it, you can see the game column and you can see like the sack column. And every time when I knew I needed an edge rusher, I would look over at the sacks. Outside of Greg Hardy, nobody was really putting up a lot of sacks, Brian. So who do I go with other than James Houston?
Yeah, no, I know, man. I know. I was the only other name I had written down who's been like a good like rotational rusher, but not like he's not a great player, is Jacob Martin that played for the Houston Texans. I was just like, sure, man. Like, let's go with that one.
At least I could say he had like a couple cool games. Yeah. That's all I'm hanging my hat on.
You could have cheated and gone with Carl Brooks from Bowling Green last year that had like 4 sacks and 6 tackles for loss for Green Bay.
He's too soon. Yeah, but how different is that with going with with a guy like Carl Brooks and me taking Houston, who is a rotational rusher? We don't know what Carl Brooks' role is going to be this upcoming.
Sure. Well, I mean, he's on the trend up. I don't know if James Houston's on the trend up, man. He had like 8 sacks, and I don't think he had anything last year. So it's
All right, you're back to back. We need a running back from you and a defensive lineman.
Defensive lineman I mentioned already. I'm going to go with Sebastian Joseph Day in the 2018 draft from the Rutgers Scarlet Knights I guess they were the LA Rams at that point. I don't think they were still in St. Louis. They were still they were LA at that point. Joe, I remember this pick. He was only Sebastian Joseph at that time. He was not Sebastian Joseph Day. He didn't have the hyphen yet. And I remember watching that pick and I was like, who the heck is that? I'm a Rutgers guy, right? Like I'm a Jersey guy. I'm like, who the heck is Sebastian Joseph Day? I have no idea who that guy is. And he has turned himself into a good player, man. Like he's not one of the best defensive linemen in the NFL, but he has been on the Rams Super Bowl team. He has been a consistently just solid player. He's started a ton of games. Now he's on the Los Angeles Chargers. He's just a good player. He's not a great player. He's not a bad player. He's just somewhere in between of a good rotational player. So I'll take Sebastian Joseph Day. Yeah. Running back was actually a little bit of a tough one for me because two guys before I close this out. Okay. 2 guys. I had Khalil Herberts out of Virginia Tech a few years ago that I liked a lot. Yeah. Who's been like, good. He's been healthy.
He's a good secondary back. He's just been
so banged up. The other guy was Theo Riddick that came out of Notre Dame in 2013. Yeah. He hasn't been a good runner, but he's been a great receiving back, like a really good secondary receiving back. I'm probably going to go with Khalil Herbert out of Virginia Tech in the 2021 draft just because he's been like he averages like 4.9 yards a carry, I think, in his 3 years. It's just he's been so banged up that he's just kind of lost opportunities. But I'll go with Khalil Herbert to round out my team.
Yeah, that's a strong one. Latavius Murray was the home run there. I guess I just have safety left, and my safety that I had written down is Xavier Woods, 2017 pick 191 out of Louisiana Tech, 106 career games, 336 tackles, 10 interceptions. I was pleasantly surprised by the interception production. Not as good as Quandre Diggs, but can't go wrong with Xavier Woods. Am I missing any other positions here? I think
that's it.
I've picked.
You didn't like the safety depth there, though? Okay. You don't like the safety depth?
Okay, so I didn't know that you were going to – I didn't know that I had Quandre Diggs listed as a corner because I stupidly keep writing these guys down at the position that they were drafted in.
Even without him, though.
Who else did you have?
I had Chuck Clark, 2017, who's been a good player. I had Jordan Fuller, who 2020 for the LA Rams. I had Alohi Gilman out of Notre Dame, who was really good this past year for the Chargers in 2020. I got Marcus Epps in 2019 by the Philadelphia Eagles. There was some decent safety options, man. There was decent safety options.
So to recap the teams, and I want everybody in the comments to let us know who won.
I won.
Quarterback. Well, this is my team. Quarterback, Gardner Minshew. Running back, Latavius Murray. Dude, I think I cooked you on this one. This one might not even be close. Wide receiver, Antonio Brown. Tight end, Ryan Griffin. Offensive lineman, Ryan Jensen. Defensive lineman, Christian Covington. Edge rusher, I'm a little thin on defense. Edge rusher, James Houston. Linebacker, Foyesade Aluakan. Cornerback, Justin Bethel. And safety, Xavier Woods. Ryan's team was Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, running back, Khalil Herbert. Wide receiver, which is total BS, Darren Waller. Tight end, Charles Clay. I can't believe I set that precedent. Offensive lineman, Jason Kelce. Defensive lineman, Sebastian Joseph Day. Edge rusher, Greg Hardy. Linebacker, Danny Trevathan. Cornerback, Byron Maxwell. And then safety, Quandre Diggs. Only thing I'm going to say is I think that they're...
Yeah.
No, there are a bunch of position groups that are super even in this situation. And I think where I have a little bit of an edge on you is the fact that at running back, there's a huge gap. At receiver, there is a huge gap.
There's a big gap. Look, I will defer to this. Ready? If I work through this, I'll say, to be nice, quarterback push. I'll say a push for quarterback, okay? Tyrod and Gardner's like the same thing, dude. It's the same thing.
All right. As of right now, if somebody's rewatching this in 3 years, it might be.
Well, when Gardner's
different.
A backup for another team, like, yeah, sure, dude. Yeah, push though. Push for now. I actually would give myself a slight edge, but I'll say push just to be fair. Running back,
no.
Joe. Wide receiver,
me.
Joe. Tight end, me. Offensive line,
fine.
Me. Defensive line,
we'll
say push. Edge, me. Linebacker,
push.
Me. Dude, that's a push.
No, Aluakan's still playing, and he's the same amount of production as Danny Trevathan. He has more production.
I'll give you one then, okay? So that's 3-3 so far.
Okay.
Corner, me, dude. Byron Maxwell's way better corner than Justin Bethel. Justin Bethel's a better special teamer.
Safety's a push.
Safety's a push. So. Quandre Diggs over Xavier Woods? Dude, that's 5-3 Ryan. That's 5-3 Ryan. 5-3 with like 2 pushes.
That's cap. I'll let the comments decide that. At Joe DeLeone, at Rise and Draft, folks. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back with more.